These days you can barely see it, huddled beneath the skyscrapers of central Hong Kong, beneath Victoria Peak there. But the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, that rather unassuming cube there, was, believe it or not, when it was built 40 years ago, the tallest building on the Hong Kong harbour side. I've been staying there for the better part of the last 30 years, and I've an unrequited love affair with this hotel. It's an opinion shared with many people all over the world.
I've always said, I said to people, if you sat in the lobby of the Mandarin Hotel, if you sat there long enough, the world would go by.
And Mandarin is different, but done with a passion, and for that I really enjoy it.
There was always the thought that the Mandarin would become an institution, similar to the Savoy in London. And, you know, we made it that.
If you don't go to the Mandarin, that means you don't know.
It was such enjoyable work, you know, it was, you know, I should have paid to go there. They shouldn't have paid me.
Any request I make, anything that I ask for, they find a way to be positive in their response.
It has a very special place in Hong Kong, in my view, and it sort of seems like the mother of Hong Kong hotels.
I've always loved birthdays. Call me old-fashioned, but I have. And a special birthday for me, of course, is the Mandarin's birthday, and I'll be there with bells on. A lot of people ask me my age, and I always say I'm as old as my tongue and a little older than my teeth.
In the 1960s, the Hong Kong Land Company were planning to replace the Queen's Building on the colony's waterfront. The money-making scheme most favoured by the developers was for offices and shops. However, the chairman and taipan of Jardine Matheson, Hugh Barton, was convinced there was a need for a luxury hotel in the centre of Hong Kong.
One could never forget Hugh Barton. He was the most wonderful character, lots of fun, very Irish. And he really made the Mandarin Hotel. There's no question about it. It was his enthusiasm and his in fact, they called it Barton's Folly.
And why Barton's Folly, pray?
Well, because they didn't think it was going to be a success, but Hugh did know. He was convinced that it's going to be a great success, and how he was proven right in the end.
The Mandarin is a very British institution, influenced by its location at the very heart of the territory. Inside, it's a picture of restrained elegance, with the most beautiful decor, strongly influenced by the use of Chinese paintings and objets d'art. A man who's been styling all of our lives for the past 40 years is Sir Terence Conran. Why does he think this style has managed to stand the test of time?
Well, I think that many traditional things do stand the test of the time if they're kept in top order and if they're well designed, well conceived in the first place. And certainly one of my memories of the Mandarin was that it is very well run, very well maintained, and of course it was one of the very first luxury hotels back in the early 60s, and it has gained a stature because of that, I think. Well, I think the sort of Anglo-Chinese qualities of it are actually rather attractive, and at this particular moment in time, people are perhaps fleeing away from, you know, sort of starkish interiors and wanting things that are a bit more pretty and more comfortable and less austere. And certainly the Mandarin, you know, falls into that category very well indeed.
Being influenced by films, I designed it from the point of view of setups. You giving a focal point to people. There should be some particular thing which catches your eye, rather like the film has actors to catch your eye. By visiting the country that you're doing the job in, and just by wandering around the place and having a couple of drinks in the various bars, you absorb what you're seeing, and without you knowing it up front, something evolves just by kicking it around.
One of my favourite pieces, Don, is the massive gilded carving in the lobby lounge.
That, believe it or not, is, I used everything, every single piece that we purchased or found. And when it was all done, the only bit over was those 3 bits there. We sent out runners to Peking and various antique dealers. We asked them to find them, which they did very well. Each of those pieces is carved in one piece of timber. They're not bits, shut on. That's a carving out of the same piece of timber. And they were mainly used as architraves round doors, hence the shape.
It was when he was in Madrid that Don Ashton came across an eccentric and rather flamboyant Malaysian artist called Gerard Henderson, liked his work and commissioned him to do a number of very large pieces of art all over the hotel. Most notably this enormous mural of 3 Chinese princesses or goddesses that dominates the lobby. And he did it in a rather unusual way. He projected from a slide over there an image onto the wall and scored the outlines and the wet cement as it was drying, and then when it had dried, applied gold leaf to the surface. And the result has survived for very nearly 40 years. One of my favourite hidden conceits about the lobby, and I'm never quite sure whether Don Ashton knew about it, is that lurking among all this opulence is the broom cupboard. Chairman of the Mandarin board, Harold Lee, was a huge influence in the making of this legend.
Well, those days, Hong Kong was a colony and very colonial. So everything, actually was British, foreigners British. The banks were run by the British, trading firms, and then Chinese didn't take a part. So my husband wanted Hong Kong to be more international, cosmopolitan. So that's the reason he really wanted to build this hotel and name it Mandarin, and there's a meaning for Mandarin to bring the East and the West together.
The hotel had a huge advantage in having an utterly magnificent site in the financial centre of Hong Kong. The architects chosen were a local firm, Lee and Orange.
We were at that point in time where we were going from window unit air conditioners and things like that. We were going into centralised air conditioning. We were going into firefighting equipment. All of these things were rolling up, behind us, and we were getting one jump ahead. The finish of the outside of the hotel, which was called Shanghai plaster, and it was a very special. This part of the world, Chinese part, it was a finishing coat you put over the concrete. You could make it grey, you could make it almost black, you could do all sorts of things. And again, this is where it came in, looking for a material that would do that without coating the building in marble.
Well, this legendary Shanghai plaster may not be the most glamorous of building substances known, and most of the more modern buildings in the centre of the city have been clad in rather more interesting substances. But the fact of the matter is that 4 decades on, and Frank Eckermann's magic potion here has stood the test of time really rather well. The hotel finally opened its doors in September 1963 with the Red Cross Ball, which was an utterly magnificent social occasion. Everyone who was anyone came that night, and it really set the tone for the future of this hotel, because for the 40 years since, everyone, the social elite of this territory, always came to the Mandarin Hotel.
We all dressed beautifully in the old days. Cocktails at, all depended, 6 or 6:30. Right. And then dinner usually between 8 and 9. Pink gins, right. Gin and tonics, But that's mostly, these are mostly lunchtime drinks.
Oh, you lunch here as well?
Lunch here, yes. But the evening drinks were usually brandy. Actually, in those days, a lot of people drank brandy. Brandy dry or brandy soda. Whiskey was always popular, of course.
The evenings would end fairly late, wouldn't they? Presumably, if this is a supper club. How would you get home?
Walla Walla.
Because the
you know what a Walla Walla is?
These little boats.
Those little boats. Star Ferry closed at, I think it was 11 o'clock. And we were young.
You still
Makes
are.
a difference.
I will say the whole world, or even Hong Kong people, were all waiting for, because this is the first hotel in this side of the harbor. Whenever I see Mandarin Hotel, I can see the Walla Walla in front of the hotel. And get out to come in front of Mandarin, the door, with the smoke, and everyone is watching. You can hear the noise of the Walla Walla in front of Mandarin Hotel. 1, 2 is the reception at the door. People was curious because that was one of the biggest buildings I think Hong Kong ever seen in the old days as a hotel. 2 is the doorman was dressed up in the old red, tunic, what we call it, and with a beard, with a turban on the top. That was something unique for Hong Kong.
I think the first time I went there was around about 1964. It might have been 1965. It was a new sensation for me because I'd never been that far east before, and I didn't know. I was quite well known in England. I'd been doing dozens of shows, at the Palladium and things like that. But I was a little bit apprehensive about going out to the middle of Hong Kong and trying to make an audience laugh. I thought, well, what sort of an audience are we going to get? And it was wonderful. It just had no worries. Mind you, it was full of what they call Brits. And they were good. They sort of, I was there for the best part of about 4 weeks, and the hotel was at that time, was one of the best hotels I've ever been lucky enough to stay in, ever. The entrance alone was enough to knock you on your feet, it was wow.
Well, this, up on the 25th floor of the hotel, is Man Wah, and arguably the finest Chinese restaurant in the world, probably, a recreation of the interior of a palace in old China, Imperial China. But 4 decades ago, it was something very different indeed. It was called the Button Supper Club, a classic old nightclub where all the old entertainers from Britain of the 60s would come to perform.
I started it off because afterwards, people like Tony Hancock and Elizabeth Welsh, I'd bumped into, said, you've been to Hong Kong, what's it like? And they were very curious, and I had to assure them that there was no worries. It was one of the great places to go to. They used to turn up in rickshaws and Rolls Royces, and it was wonderful.
And you interpret for me, don't you? You see, I tell jokes.
There was this lovely story I used to tell about going in and buying a cheap fan, I 20 cents for a fan. And I took it back because I said, I fluttered the fan. I said, look, I paid 20 cents for the fan. I fluttered it, it's broken. And he said, no, when only pay 20 cents for fan, not flutter like that. Hold fan still, shaky head.
You're a pink toothbrush, I'm a blue toothbrush. Have we met somewhere before?
And I used to do these stupid songs like, you're a pink toothbrush, I'm a blue, and everybody knew them. They knew them more in Hong Kong than they did in London.
Max Bygraves was probably one of the first already very successful artists to have established a cabaret tradition at the Mandarin Hotel. By the early 70s, when I made my first cabaret appearances there, the Harbour Room was created, heavily disguised as Les Patterson one evening. That's to say, a powder blue suit, nicotine-stained fingers, smouldering cigarette and large scotch. It wasn't just one evening, it was the first night of the cabaret, on my first appearance in Hong Kong. And Les enters through the restaurant and mounts the stage as though he's a drunken member of the audience. At that stage, Les was Australian cultural attaché to the Far East and had quite a few things to say about how it was all done. Les was just about to enter the restaurant when the maitre d', Henry, said, "You can't go in there, sir." Les said, "What's the matter with you?" And Henry said, "You're drunk. "You're drunk, sir. You go and have a sleep." But Les refused, and there was a sort of tussle. Well, I was whispering desperately, "It's really me. It's me. I'm the show. Henry, don't you remember? Don't you recognise me?" "I don't recognise you," he said. "You go and have a sleep." The show was held up by something like 20 minutes, while I, disguised as Les, wrestled with the heavies. And of course they recognised my stardom. I was only a superstar then and not a megastar, as I am today. Edna telephoned from her suite one evening to ask, it was a Sunday, and we hadn't been told that most people are still out on their junks, and Sunday was a very bad night for cabaret. So Edna called out and she said, "How many people have booked?" And there was a very long pause, and Henry said, 4 people. So there was a little fuss on the end of the phone. 4 people. Why should I have to do this? And then there was a pause, and Henry said, "Just a moment, Dame Edna." And another long pause. He said, "2 cancel." So the dame was not at all happy. And she said, "I want to speak to the manager." And Henry said, "Manager, one of 2 people."
What makes the Mandarin special to me and others is the service, quite frankly. It's just sufficiently of the Orient to make everyone feel like a visiting potentate. It's impeccable, invisible, silent, flawless.
We will make it to have the best service. Because Chinese, believe in, when your hotel, you really have to serve your guests very well. Make them feel they were at home and not in the hotel.
Well, I was very careful about doing anything because it had a great reputation. It was only 18 months old, if that. But it was already named as one of the great leading hotels of the world, But, of course, most of the staff were local people. And they used to, oh dear, they did love learning. How, that made one very moved in a way. They were not, they were so, they enjoyed it all so much.
From the beginning, it was trained to be so, and I have to congratulate the early managers. And when I was here, we were trained really to serve with a heart. And that is the important thing. That's the difference. In the East, I think, service is done with great pride. It is not only a duty.
One time when I left out a pair of plimsolls to be whitewashed, and they came back without the shoelaces. And I was slightly surprised because I thought that this was an immaculate hotel in service. So I rang housekeeping, only to be told in a very firm voice by probably the matron that they were waiting instructions from me as to whether the laces should be ironed around or flat. So that's what I call discerning service.
The staff were so sort of obliging, very sort of like that Eastern humbleness, but very, very good, and very quick. I used to do a joke with the audience. I said, "Oh, this is a great hotel." I sent my laundry this morning. At 9 o'clock, it was back at 9:30. They refused it.
I have, I think, one of the better stories about the way they looked after you. Because of the typhoon, my suit got soaking wet. Now, we finished the broadcast at about 5:30 in the morning. I had a drink and I went back to my room about 6 o'clock. I phoned up the housekeeper and I said, "I desperately need this suit pressed because I need it again at about 10 in the morning. I haven't slept, so I'm going to bed now, but I need this suit about 10 in the morning." First of all, the housekeeper answered, 6 a.m. And secondly, she said, "Suit will be ready in 1 hour, she said. I said, "Well, look, I know it's going to be ready. Thank you so much for how wonderful you are, how great your service is, but can you make it 4 hours? Suit will be ready in 1 hour. I thought that was terribly, terribly efficient. I had to use all my powers of persuasion to beg this housekeeper not to interrupt my few hours of sleep and to deposit the suit at 10 o'clock. That is fantastic service.
They pamper me at the Mandarin. They always remember something that you specially like. They're always gladioli, my signature flower, in my room. My sweet, I should say. And there's lamingtons, those lovely Australian cakes, cubes of sponge, dipped in chocolate, and then you roll in coconut. I mean, you don't roll in coconut, you roll these lovely little cakes in coconut, and they're called lamingtons. But above all, they cater for my domestic arrangements. I travel with my New Zealand bridesmaid, Madge Alsop. I'm sorry for her. Not anymore, but I was. And they provide a lovely basket, suitable for a big dog, which they have there for people with pets. And Madge sleeps curled up at the foot of my bed. I support her, and I don't want to spoil her. But usually these days, because she's taken to snoring, they provide a very, very large walk-in wardrobe, and I can lock her in there for the night. Of course, every time you go to the Mandarin, there's a beautiful quilted sort of a bucket with a lovely antique Chinese teapot in it with the most delicious tea, and lovely little fortune cookies too. Of course, other hotels have copied. They've copied the Mandarin. They've tried to get it right, but they fail, they fail, they fail. They'll never capture the class, the style, the ambience, the mood, the intimacy, the care, the love that goes into that beautiful little hotel. And I'm doing this, I'm not being paid to do this, I can assure you. I'm doing it because I care.
Peter Stafford maintained that every guest was special, that a great hotel should be able to anticipate its guests' every need. So whatever little thing I want, whenever, it's all there, every time. Even the most extraordinary request seems routine.
I do recall back in the late 60s, I believe, it was before 70, King Baudouin and his wife Fabiola came to Hong Kong, and we put them up in the Mandarin. We converted the whole floor into a chapel, and we had a priest to give them mass every morning at 6 o'clock.
Henry Ho has been looking after guests in Manoir for 30 years. An impeccable service is of unrivaled importance to him.
We are looking very concerned of our customer, whatever their needs is. And we don't want to let the customer telling what they want. We have to find out ourselves so that we can give the first priority to the guests, what they need.
Do you need to serve him quickly?
Sometimes yes, because our client is very, very rich people, and they have involving a lot of millions of dollars of business. And one minute time, we might be lose billions of dollars. So this is very important, the timing.
So your staff must be very nervous at times, I should think.
No, they was very skillful.